By the early 3rd century BC, Rome was no longer just a single city-state but a growing power, pushing its influence across the Italian peninsula. This wasn't the Rome we think of as an empire, but it was certainly a republic on the rise. Rome's disciplined legions, relentless ambition, and efficient organization had allowed it to conquer its neighbors and consolidate power within Italy. Through a mix of military strength and strategic alliances, Rome brought surrounding Latin, Etruscan, and Samnite territories under its control. But this rapid expansion soon attracted the attention of powerful adversaries across the Mediterranean. One of those adversaries was Pyrrhus of Epirus, a king from a small kingdom in northwestern Greece with big dreams of conquest and glory. Pyrrhus was a formidable military commander, known as one of the greatest tacticians of his time. His legacy would influence military leaders centuries later, from Hannibal to Alexander the Great. To understand the story of Pyrrhus, we need to go back to his origins in Epirus, a rugged region in northwestern Greece. Epirus was not a powerhouse like Athens or Sparta, but its people had a strong warrior tradition. Pyrrhus was born around 319 BC to Iacides, the king of Epirus and Phea. Iacides traced his lineage to Achilles, the legendary hero of the Trojan War. This connection to Achilles was part of the royal family's identity. As a descendant of one of Greece's greatest warriors, Pyrrhus grew up believing he was destined for greatness. But Pyrrhus's early life was far from stable. His father's rule was constantly threatened by political rivals, and the region itself was a hotbed of shifting alliances and invasions. When Pyrrhus was only 2 years old, Iacides was overthrown in a political coup, forcing the royal family into exile. In exile, Pyrrhus and his family found refuge in the court of Glaucias, the king of the Illyrians. Glaucias became a protector and mentor to the young prince, raising him alongside his own children. While Pyrrhus grew up in exile under the protection of the Illyrian king Glaucias, the Greek world was engulfed in a series of fierce wars. The death of Alexander the Great had thrown his vast empire into chaos, as his former generals, known as the Diadochi, fought each other for power. Among these generals was Antigonus Monophthalmus, a powerful leader building his forces in Asia Minor. One of the men fighting for control was Cassander, the ruler of Macedon. But in 313 BC, Cassander's attention was diverted by Antigonus's rising power in the east. Fearing an invasion, Cassander shifted his focus to defend against this new threat, creating an opportunity for Pyrrhus's father, Iacides. Seizing this chance, Iacides returned to Epirus, where he quickly regained support and rallied an army. The people of Epirus, inspired by the return of their king, rallied to his cause. In response, Cassander sent his brother Philip with a well-prepared army to crush Iacides' resurgence. They clashed in 2 brutal battles, and though Iacides fought bravely, he was ultimately defeated. In the final battle, he sustained a mortal wound, and shortly after, he passed away. The dream of restoring his family's rule in Epirus died with him. The death of Iacides left Pyrrhus with an even greater burden. He was now the rightful heir to the throne of Pyrrhus, a king without a kingdom. By 307 BC, Pyrrhus's fortunes took a sudden turn. His protector, Glaucias, decided it was time for Pyrrhus to reclaim his birthright. Leading his forces into Epirus, Glaucias overthrew the ruling regime and placed the 11-year-old Pyrrhus on the throne. Too young to rule independently, Pyrrhus's guardians governed in his stead, guiding the young king as he grew and prepared to one day lead on his own. At 17, Pyrrhus was invited back to Illyria to attend the wedding of one of Glaucias' sons. It was a time of celebration and reunion with the man who had protected him since childhood. But back in Epirus, trouble was brewing. Seeing their young king away from his kingdom, the Molossians seized the chance to rebel. The Molossians, tired of foreign influence and loyal to the old ruling line, rose up in rebellion. In Pyrrhus's absence, his supporters were overwhelmed, and Neoptolemus, the previous king, was reinstated. This time Glaucias couldn't intervene to help him. Pyrrhus had been cast out of his own kingdom, forced into exile once more. For Pyrrhus, the news was a devastating blow. His dreams of ruling Epirus had been shattered once again. Now a king without a kingdom, Pyrrhus faced the harsh reality of exile. With his throne lost, Pyrrhus traveled to the Peloponnese to join his brother-in-law, Demetrius Poliorcetes, a brilliant general who was locked in a fierce struggle against Cassander in southern Greece. Demetrius was married to Pyrrhus's sister, Didymia, and his army provided a new path for Pyrrhus to gain experience, earn allies, and perhaps find a way back to his kingdom. His years in Demetrius's service allowed him to build his reputation as a skilled soldier, forging connections with influential commanders and troops. Pyrrhus's service under Demetrius would lead him to one of the most pivotal battles of the Hellenistic Age, the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC. This was no ordinary conflict. It was a showdown between the remaining Diadochi, Alexander the Great's successors, as they fought for control over his fragmented empire. On one side stood Antigonus Monophthalmus, Demetrius's father, commanding a massive coalition that included Pyrrhus and thousands of soldiers. On the other side were the combined forces of Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Cassander, each with ambitions of their own. In the ranks of Demetrius's army, Pyrrhus played a crucial role as a frontline commander. Facing the vast and battle-hardened armies of the coalition, Pyrrhus fought with remarkable bravery and skill, leading charges and pushing back against the enemy's advance. But despite the bravery of Pyrrhus and Demetrius, the coalition forces had a critical advantage: the use of war elephants under Seleucus, which were decisive in breaking through the Antigonid lines. Antigonus's forces were eventually overwhelmed, and in the final moments of the battle, the great general Antigonus himself was struck down, ending his life and his ambitions. For Demetrius and his allies, it was a devastating defeat, and the aftermath scattered their forces across the Greek world. By 298 BC, Pyrrhus's journey took him to Egypt, where he was held as a political hostage in Alexandria. This arrangement was part of a peace treaty between his brother-in-law Demetrius and Ptolemy Soter, one of the most powerful of Alexander's former generals. During his time in Alexandria, Pyrrhus formed an alliance with the Ptolemaic court, marrying Antigone, Ptolemy's stepdaughter. The marriage strengthened Pyrrhus's political connections, and he quickly gained Ptolemy's favor. Ptolemy, always looking to expand his influence in Greece, saw an opportunity in the young warrior king. By 297 BC, Cassander of Macedon was dead, and the political landscape in Greece was shifting. Sensing an opportunity, Ptolemy gave Pyrrhus the men and resources to reclaim his throne. With Ptolemy's support, Pyrrhus returned to Epirus at the head of an army, determined to restore his rule. Upon his return, Pyrrhus faced a dilemma. The Molossians had placed Neoptolemus back on the throne, and rather than wage a bloody civil war, Pyrrhus agreed to an unusual compromise. The two kings would rule Epirus jointly, with each one trying to consolidate their power and support. Pyrrhus and Neoptolemus each saw the other as a threat, and it wasn't long before both began plotting in secret to eliminate their rival. Eventually, Pyrrhus learned of a plot against his life. Deciding to act before his rival could, he invited Neoptolemus to a dinner, where he secretly arranged to have him assassinated. At that fateful dinner, Neoptolemus met his end. With his rival eliminated, Pyrrhus secured his position as the sole ruler of Epirus. The ambitious young king had finally reclaimed his kingdom. By 295 BC, Pyrrhus's ambitions led him to make a strategic decision. He moved the capital of his kingdom to Ambracia, positioning himself closer to the heart of Greek politics. His desire to expand Epirus's influence soon drove him into direct confrontation with his former ally and brother-in-law, Demetrius. Seeing an opportunity to undermine Demetrius's growing power, Pyrrhus invaded Thessaly while Demetrius was preoccupied besieging Thebes. But Demetrius responded immediately, abandoning the siege and sending his son, Antigonus Gonatas, to continue it. Outnumbered, Pyrrhus retreated to Epirus, regrouping his forces. By 289 BC, Demetrius was ready to bring the fight to Pyrrhus directly. He first targeted Pyrrhus's allies, the Aetolian League, hoping to break their alliance and pave a clear path into Epirus. The Aetolians, however, knew their terrain and retreated into the hills, leaving Demetrius's army to ransack the empty countryside. Frustrated but undeterred, Demetrius stationed his trusted general Pantocus in Aetolia and turned his attention to Epirus itself. Pyrrhus raised his army and advanced to support the Aetolians. In a twist of fate, the two armies passed each other on different roads. Demetrius entered Epirus unchallenged, while Pyrrhus found himself face-to-face with Pantocus in Aetolia. The clash between Pyrrhus and Pantocus was legendary. Leading from the front, Pyrrhus fought with the courage and skill that had earned him respect across Greece. In a bold display of leadership, he even engaged Pantocus in single combat, ultimately emerging victorious and securing a crucial morale boost for his army. With Pantocus defeated, Demetrius left without a key general and forced to abandon his plans to conquer Epirus. Though his invasion had inflicted damage, Pyrrhus's triumph secured Epirus's independence and strengthened his reputation. His bold tactics and courage on the battlefield continued to enhance his growing legend. In 280 BC, Pyrrhus would embark on a new campaign that would bring him face-to-face with the Roman Republic, marking the beginning of the Pyrrhic War. In the early 3rd century BCE, the Greek city-state of Tarentum in southern Italy faced a growing threat from the expanding Roman Republic. The Romans had already subdued most of the Italian peninsula, and their powerful legions were now pushing into the Greek cities of Magna Graecia. Fearing the loss of their independence, the Tarentines sought help beyond their shores. The Tarentines turned to Pyrrhus, whose reputation as a formidable warrior king made him the ideal candidate to lead their struggle against Rome. Pyrrhus was intrigued by the opportunity. Rome was a rising power, and a victory in Italy could open the door to an empire that spanned the western Mediterranean. Seeking guidance, Pyrrhus consulted the Oracle of Delphi, who encouraged him to aid the Tarentines. Emboldened by the prophecy, Pyrrhus saw this campaign as a chance to fulfill his destiny and carve out a vast empire. However, before setting out, Pyrrhus ensured he would not be left vulnerable in Greece. He forged an alliance with Ptolemy Koronos, the king of Macedon, his most powerful neighbor. In 280 BC, Pyrrhus arrived in Italy with a well-prepared force of 20,000 infantry, 3,000 cavalry, 2,000 archers, 500 slingers, and perhaps most famously 20 war elephants, the first the Romans had ever encountered. To the Romans, Pyrrhus's army was unlike anything they had faced before, but the Romans were undeterred. They mustered their legions and prepared for battle. The two forces would meet near the city of Heraclea in the summer of 280 BC, marking the beginning of Pyrrhus's legendary campaign in Italy. The Battle of Heraclea was Pyrrhus's first major test against Rome. His forces clashed with the Roman legions in fierce combat. Though initially matched in strength, Pyrrhus unleashed his secret weapon, his war elephants. The elephants smashed through the Roman lines, and the soldiers were terrified. Despite their bravery, the Romans were forced to retreat, leaving Pyrrhus victorious at Heraclea. Though triumphant, Pyrrhus suffered significant losses at Heraclea. He was struck by the tenacity of the Roman soldiers, who had fought fiercely even when retreating. By 279 BC, Pyrrhus had advanced further into Roman territory, meeting the Roman legions once again in the Battle of Asculum. Determined to halt Pyrrhus's campaign, the Romans adapted to his tactics, making adjustments to counter the elephants and phalanx formations. The Romans fought with relentless determination, using mobility and hit-and-run tactics to chip away at Pyrrhus's forces. But on the second day, Pyrrhus finally broke through their lines with his elephants, clinching a hard-fought victory. However, the cost was steep. Pyrrhus's army was severely depleted. His victories at Heraclea and Asculum had come at a great price, giving rise to the term we know today as a Pyrrhic victories, a win so costly that it borders on defeat. In 278 BCE, Pyrrhus found himself at a critical juncture, receiving offers from two directions. To the west, the Greek cities of Sicily sought his help to drive out Carthage, one of Rome's great rivals for control of the western Mediterranean. Simultaneously, he received a plea from Macedon, whose king Ptolemy Koronos had been killed by invading Gauls. They wanted Pyrrhus to take the Macedonian throne. Pyrrhus chose Sicily, the opportunity to challenge Carthage and gain control over the Greek cities. Arriving in Sicily, Pyrrhus quickly made an impact. He lifted the Carthaginian siege of Syracuse and was soon proclaimed king of the island. His ambitions took root as he organized Sicily's defenses and prepared an assault on Carthage's strongholds. But his high-handed tactics and demands for loyalty soon alienated the Sicilian Greeks. They had welcomed him as a liberator, but began to see him as an overbearing ruler more interested in power than in their autonomy. The Greek cities in Sicily, wary of Pyrrhus's ambitions, began to resist his rule. Sensing his authority slipping, Pyrrhus abandoned his plans for further campaigns against Carthage. Instead, he turned back to Italy. However, the Romans had recovered from their earlier defeats and had regrouped, determined to end Pyrrhus's campaign once and for all. The final showdown between Pyrrhus and Rome came in 275 BC at the Battle of Beneventum. This time, the Romans had adapted to Pyrrhus's tactics, studying his use of elephants and preparing strategies to counter his phalanx formations. Under the command of the skilled Roman consul, Manius Curius Dentatus, the Roman legions were ready to face Pyrrhus one last time. At Beneventum, Pyrrhus deployed his elephants, hoping once more to overwhelm the Romans with their size and power. But the Roman soldiers, having learned from their previous battles, used flaming javelins and noisemakers to disrupt and confuse the elephants. As the elephants panicked and turned back into Pyrrhus's own lines, chaos spread through his army. The Romans seized the moment, launching a fierce counterattack. Facing mounting losses and with no reinforcements, Pyrrhus was forced to order a retreat. The Romans emerged victorious, and the battle marked a turning point in their campaign to secure Italy. With no choice but to abandon his dreams of an Italian empire, Pyrrhus returned to Epirus, leaving the Romans in control of the Italian peninsula. After his costly Italian campaign and the loss at Beneventum, Pyrrhus returned to Epirus with diminished resources but undiminished ambition. The lure of conquest still called to him, and soon he found a new target, Sparta. He believed that if he could control Sparta, he could solidify his influence in Greece and restore his reputation. In 272 BC, Pyrrhus marched south with a sizable force, confident that Sparta would fall quickly. At the time, Sparta was governed by the young king Arrius, who was away campaigning in Crete. Pyrrhus saw this as an opportunity to seize the city, perhaps even paving the way to capture Macedon or unify Greece under his rule. When Pyrrhus launched his attack, he was met with fierce resistance as Spartans defended their homeland with everything they had. The Spartans held off Pyrrhus's forces with unexpected resilience, and soon reinforcements arrived, led by King Arrius himself returning from Crete. Realizing that the siege was dragging on with no end in sight, Pyrrhus made the difficult decision to abandon his siege of Sparta and regroup. Shortly after withdrawing from Sparta, Pyrrhus received an invitation from the city of Argos, where two rival factions were vying for control. As Pyrrhus entered Argos under the cover of night, his forces clashed with those of Antigonus Gonatas, the Macedonian king who had arrived to support the rival faction. In the confusion of battle, Pyrrhus fought fiercely, but the narrow streets left him vulnerable. During the fight, an Argive soldier struck Pyrrhus, wounding him. With Pyrrhus's death in the streets of Argos, one of the greatest military minds of the ancient world met an unexpected and tragic end.